Welcome to Healthy Brain, Happy Body, a podcast from the Northeast Region Biofeedback Society. I'm Dr. Saul Rosenthal, a health psychologist in the Boston area, and your host as we investigate the incredible connections between brain and body. Welcome, everyone. My guest today is Dr. Jay Wiles, a licensed clinical and performance psychologist who specializes in helping people perform at their best under pressure. Jay works with professional athletes, Fortune 100 executives, military personnel, and other high performers, and he's helping them optimize recovery, resilience, and their performance. So Jay is also the Chief Health and Performance Officer at Ohm Health, and he's helping develop new approaches to heart rate variability and resonance frequency training. He recently gave a webinar to the NRBS, and today we're going to talk about what he's learned about working with elite performers, some emerging ideas about resonance frequency and HRV, and why he believes biofeedback should do more than simply measure physiology. So Jay, welcome to Healthy Brain, Happy Body.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me.
Well, I always like to start with kind of origin stories, where people came from. So I think you started working with in the Veterans Administration and with military, and then you've kind of moved into elite sports and performance. So what drew you in that direction?
Yeah, so originally I was in school and then got a degree in clinical psychology. So my doctoral degree is in clinical psychology. And at first, I actually wasn't that interested in moving outside of the realm of clinical work. Like I thought, okay, yeah, I'm gonna probably work. Actually, no. What's so interesting is at first I was really interested in severe and persistent mental illness. So I did an externship when I was in training at a state hospital in Williamsburg, Virginia, and got to really kind of see what severe and persistent mental illness looked like. So people that were kind of like semi-incarcerated or not guilty by reason of insanity, individuals with severe schizoaffective, schizophrenia, a lot of just more of kind of like the kind of extreme side of the clinical pathology. And I really enjoyed it, but it was that experience that I thought, I'm not sure if this is exactly what I want to do with my life, if this is how I want to spend my time. Granted, learned a lot, got to see things that actually most psychologists don't get to see in that setting. And then I went to the VA, where I was really actually focused on health psychology. So I was always interested in the intersection between physiological health and mental health. And it was through that time where I actually did a rotation in pain management. And so during my pain management rotation, I was at the VA in Richmond, Virginia, and there was a clinic called the VIP Center, or the Veterans Integrative Pain Center. And I was exposed at that point in time to a bunch of alternative integrative medicine strategies, one of them being biofeedback, and particularly heart rate variability biofeedback. Now, we did all peripheral biofeedback, but there was an emphasis on HRV biofeedback. And what I just found very interesting was not only did we have the ability to quantify and show people in real time their nervous system's response to breathing, but also, like, for these veterans, they were so interested in what are ways that I can help to manage my pain response, but not have to do so by either taking more medications or like sitting there and talking to a psychologist about kind of all these other things. And so it was fascinating. So we published some studies on it, and I was kind of hooked from then. And so kind of just by way of background, I grew up as an athlete. So I was a multi-sport athlete. Never was interested in going into sports and performance psychology because for me, I wanted to be in like the hardcore clinical side, like I just mentioned. But then the more and more I got into studying biofeedback and applied psychophysiology, I was like, oh, well, this actually kind of really maps well onto the work that these individuals can do for overall performance. And so I kind of just like things like relationships begot other relationships. And I got introduced to a lot of like more high performers who at first we were working more on the I guess you could say more towards the clinical side, anxiety, stress resiliency, those types of things. And I was like, you know what? I think this HRV biofeedback stuff could map very well onto the work that we're doing here. So I started using it and leveraging it. And I just noticed that people, not only were they getting better, they just loved it. Like they found a lot of excitement and the novelty of quantifying their response as opposed to just more traditional talk therapy. And so the rest is kind of history. And then I kind of just kept going deeper into the woods of this stuff and got really interested in creating algorithms and technology. And yeah, here we are today.
Yeah. So you've worked with lots of high performers like athletes, military, like we were saying. Are there common, psychological characteristics of high performers? Anything that may have surprised you?
Yeah, I would say both kind of positive and negative. And negative I'll use very loosely now because I think most of what I'm about to say you could get for better or for worse, you could leverage and say these are actually all net positive things. On the positive side, these are individuals just with a high degree of drive and motivation that is just almost unseen in a normal population. And most people would see, if they were to truly see kind of how these individuals structure their day and their time, most quote unquote normal people would think that there was something pathologically wrong with them. Like there's
Hmm.
actually some concern with how obsessive they can be. And to an extent, like they're probably right. Like most of these individuals have such a deep drive and passion for what they do that from an outsider's perspective, it looks a little bit crazy. And some of them too are like a little bit too obsessive with things. And so when you start to like layer on data, like I do, that can backfire for them. Because if their whole constant goal is, let's say, let's raise my HRV, and they're not seeing their HRV raised on their wearable device, they can become quite frustrated that, oh, the process isn't working, like you're not, good at your job, etc. They can fill in their own blank as a part of their narrative. But I think that drive and passion is huge. Dedication to their craft as well. It's both a science and an art for these individuals. So the science just being like, hey, I want to break this apart like an engineer and just look at it very linearly, whether it's a sport, whether it's like, hey, I want to enhance mental performance in the workspace, or if I want to unify people in the workspace, they engineer everything by kind of deconstructing it, which I think is a really fascinating like personality characteristic to a lot of these individuals. And then on the negative side, I would say, and this is going to be more of like the psychologist talk from me, and very related to what I mentioned already, is a high degree of neuroticism. These people tend to be immensely neurotic, and neurotic to the extent where, again, an outsider would see it as like high stress, high anxiety, high desire for control, which I would agree probably all of those things are true for most high performers, but they know how to channel it in the right way. Something that can actually be beneficial not just for them, but for other people, whether it's on their team or whether it's in their workplace. Now, that can be overused, and it can be something that can cause these individuals, kind of given other personality characteristics, to be a little bit more of a tyrant in what they do. And that's where we start to see a lot of the negative effects of that personality characteristic. But a lot of my work with them is trying to take some of that high degree of neuroticism and leverage it for good.
Does it surprise them that what they see as a, whether we call it a personality characteristic or whatever, that's what helps them succeed, but it also can get in their way? So does it surprise them when that happens, or what sort of misconceptions do your high performers have as far as their own ability to perform?
Yeah, so I think many of them are self-aware to notice it. Some people aren't, and so bringing it to their degree of awareness is actually really helpful for them. Many of them are very self-aware of it, but they would say that the benefits for them of being highly neurotic and driven and motivated significantly outweighs the negative side of it. Where when I actually start to see people disagree with that statement is when they're like, okay, I actually see this impacting my relationships. Or it's like, yeah, nobody in the job actually likes me. Like they know that I do a great job at what I do, but nobody likes me. Or, my teammates don't really like me. They don't understand kind of like where I'm at. And so some people have a self-awareness to say like, oh yeah, I need to work on this. I don't see this as a very beneficial personality characteristic. And some of them just don't care. They're like, I have made it this far and have basically kind of created my own path, that I don't want to veer away from the plan that's actually been successful for me, with not acknowledging that aspects of their personality have indeed been a detriment to them as opposed to just fully 100% positive.
And just sort of shifting to the physiology piece, for because that's of course mostly what we're here to talk about.
Yeah.
How do you leverage that information to sort of educate them about performance and help them improve their own? And does that even fit in with the personality piece?
Yeah, I think it does. I think one thing that I have to watch out for again is just like, I don't want them to become obsessive with the data to the point of seeing it only as like an objective source of truth that should guide all their behavior. because so many of them are actually coming to me because they've either heard me on a podcast or was recommended to me by someone else who has been a client of mine or on a sports team that I work with, whatever it may be. And they're coming to me because they're like, hey, I've been collecting data from a wearable for however many years, 5, 6, 7, 10 years for some of these individuals. And I noticed that these certain metrics, typically heart rate, resting heart rate, maybe respiration rate, and more specifically heart rate variability, has either remained unchanged or has been degrading over the years. And so therefore they already see it as a complicated problem that needs fixing. And so what they're here to see me for is like, hey, like I heard like you're the HRV guy, like help me improve my HRV. To which I have to have a very open and honest discussion that like, hey, listen, I am here less as the quote unquote HRV guy to help you and more that I am here to help you with better understanding your nervous system's response under stress and then teaching you how to better self-regulate it. So I'm here to teach two things: better self-awareness and number two, better self-regulation. And so a byproduct of that sometimes is that we'll see some of these metrics change, some of these physiological metrics change. But I'm not intending to set out to say, hey, the mechanism of assessing whether or not we succeeded or failed at me working with you is you increasing, let's say, your HRV by 10%. What I'm actually looking at is for you to say, yeah, I've developed some immensely strong tools via the use of data to better become more self-aware of when my nervous system is showing that it's not super stable and needs a little bit more assistance. And then I'm able to self-regulate better. I'm able to have better self-control over my emotional response, better staying in the zone, staying in a state of flow. And the thing that's probably, I guess, worth me noting is that while I leverage these objective markers and training and of course biofeedback, it's all kind of adjunctive. It's not like the singular thing that we're doing. There's a lot of things that we're working on in conjunction with one another. But I think that I have to, like, from the get-go, especially with high performers, say, hey, like, this is not a numbers game. Like, we don't say that success is predicated on some number being increased. Like, that's really not our focus. If it happens, it happens. Great. Like, we can cheer that on, but that's not the focus or the goal.
Yeah. So data as a tool rather than necessarily the goal.
Yes.
And that also brings up something that you talked about in the webinar, which is, I think you used the phrase closing the loop between the data about performance and interventions to improve performance. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. So right now, with the advent of wearable technology, we all have access to data that, on our finger, on our wrist, that used to only be accessible in labs. Like, when I first started, when I was doing this within the Department of Veteran Affairs, there was no such thing as Apple Watch. There was no such thing as Oura Ring or Whoop Band. Nothing was collecting heart rate variability data. You came in and we either had a really high fidelity, like PPG finger sensor, or we were putting you into hooking you up to a 12 lead, sometimes 24 lead EKG. And that's how we were collecting data. So, people weren't buying this for their home and setting up EKGs and running these tests and doing biofeedback, but now it's accessible to us and at a very inexpensive price. I mean, most wearables nowadays you can get for $200 to $300. I mean, and so that's actually pretty awesome. And so I want to celebrate that we now have accessibility to data that 15, 20 years ago would have cost somebody an arm and a leg to go into a clinic and have done. So that's great. Like, let's celebrate that. The problem, though, that arises is, well, a couple problems with that. Number one is the fidelity of data that we're getting. Like, some are really questionable. Some are pretty decent, but many are just kind of questionable. And the one thing that ends up being a huge problem with that is that the people that are actually making decisions based on that behavior may be making decisions based on really poor data. So then we're not really, like, what are we actually accomplishing there? And I would say the even bigger problem is that people are being handcuffed by collecting all this data, getting a reading in the morning, some proprietary resiliency score or whatever it is, recovery score, and not knowing what to do with it at all. Like, it's just like, hey, here's kind of some of the analytics of your sleep and your nervous system data last night. without actually like having anything to do with that data. So in other words, I wake up and I see day after day, my whatever, wearable I'm using says, you're in the red again today. You're in the red. You didn't sleep well. You didn't recover well. Your resting heart rate's high. Your HRV is lower. And then now what do I do? And I found with like so many of my clients, they have no clue what to do, or they're making a really poor decision. They say, my data's red, so therefore I think that's giving me the day off, right? I don't need to train, like I don't need to focus on my nutrition, I don't need to do any biofeedback or whatever it may be. Like they're just like, I need to rest. And I think that can be a huge problem. So when I say closing the loop, what I'm most interested in is not just having data for data's sake, because I don't think that that's actually helpful. I honestly, like what I truly believe is that data without any action is useless. If anything, it actually might be worse than useless. It might be detrimental to the person if they start kind of falling down this, snowball of like a self-fulfilling prophecy of poor behavior. So when I refer to closing the loop, I'm saying what we really need is something that can be actionable from the data. Now, if we're just looking at data for data's sake, not really that helpful. Again, possibly detrimental. But if we can close the loop on saying, all right, we see signs, let's say, of nervous system instability. Well, what's the context? What's been happening the day before, the week before? What's kind of led up to that? And then also, what's something actionable that we can do in order to help stabilize the nervous system? So maybe kind of help pump the brakes on some of this degradation that we're seeing, or actually improve outcomes. So when I say closing the loop, I'm just saying, hey, let's not just leave the data where the data is. Like, let's actually have behavior that follows.
And of course, heart rate variability is a really nice, I guess, prototypical measure. It's both used as a measure and as an intervention. From the intervention side, we often will try to measure or calculate, I guess, is resonance frequency, which is respiration rate that optimizes heart rate variability. And we typically think of that as we kind of test it out, and that's what we use. But it's actually not stable, or as stable as we like to think it is. What have you been finding out? I mean, and there's some studies out there, and you've talked about that. So what are you finding out about the stability of resonance frequency?
Yeah, I think that, when resonance frequency was first discovered, by Lair and the Vashilos and colleagues that worked on these studies, I think that, it was cutting edge in terms of like the information that they had and what they developed. And I think that most of it still remains like very true and stable. But I think that everything just felt very fixed, and it felt very fixed on a very dynamic physiological system. Like our physiology is immensely dynamic. And I think that based on context, based on situation, like we know that our physiology responds in different ways. And so I kind of like thought about this the entire time. Like when I first started, this was actually before, even like a sliding method of resonance frequency assessment was developed, because that would be more in the recent years. But I thought to myself, I was like, we're kind of setting someone up on one occasion to look at how their nervous system responds via all these different metrics on these different breathing trials. And we're just kind of like locking it in. Like that's kind of how I was taught. You lock it in. It says 6 breaths per minute. Let's hold that. No need to test them again. Like this is not going to change. So just lock them in and go. And I always thought, something feels off there. And so I remember like back in the day, again, granted, this is 20 years ago, back in the day, I would just kind of test myself a couple of times, like here and there, because I'm like, is that true? And I noticed that like mine would hover around a certain area. Typically it was like between my real like closest possible resonance on the old method is around 5 breaths per minute. It would be like, no more than 5.5. And, sometimes I would see that it was 4.5. But it was never just always 5 breaths per minute was what was the best outcome. And I tried it under different conditions, different contexts, and just never saw it always being the same thing over and over, but kind of hovering around the same area. And then when you started having studies that came out here recently, back in 2021, and they did more retest on this, the same kind of method, they found about 67% of people's changed or would vary. And again, vary slightly, and some people significantly, but not many. It was mostly just slight changes. And so I always thought to myself, like, is this a little bit more nuanced, like depending on time of day, context, situation, stress load, like all these different things? could our resonance frequency look a little bit different? And so now here recently, we've had more published studies to indicate that is true. It's probably not nearly as fixed as what we thought it was. And then so when I started to develop algorithms kind of based on this for the product that I've built, I wanted to take into consideration like even more of a nuance to this. Like, is this something that actually is so dynamic that maybe it changes from almost like moment to moment? I didn't predict it that it would change too much, but is there even these subtleties that in real time we could leverage an algorithm to change kind of the pace of breathing to respond to what our physiology was doing in that time, in that moment? And so now that I'm kind of been in that world for a little bit of time now, I think that there's something to it. And I mentioned in the webinar, I wouldn't make any claims that, being that specific on breathing has some type of clinical or even statistically significant difference between more of like a fixed rate. But I think there's a lot to be determined on the research side there, because maybe there is something. I'm just not going to make that claim just yet.
Sure. Hopefully you'll be able to answer some of those questions. And we'll go back to that dynamic resonance frequency in a few minutes when we talk about the ohm. But another interesting, at least for me, really interesting part of your webinar is you were talking about HRV, the HRV coefficient of variation, HRV-CV.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Can you explain what that is? Because I don't think most people would know.
Yeah, totally. And it's actually a metric that it's interesting. It's used a lot in exercise physiology and performance and recovery, but in our world, like applied psychophysiology, it's not used much. But I would argue, and I'm kind of here to defend, that I actually think we should be using it a lot more. I think it's a very interesting metric that here in the last probably, I would say 5 years or so, there's been some very fascinating research on its application and its use as to why it's a good metric for looking at basically global nervous system stability across time. Now, it makes sense, like from a day-to-day, week-to-week recovery standpoint, that an exercise physiologist who's dialing in, the intensity of an athlete's exercise routine, ensuring that there's proper recovery over time, that you want to see how the nervous system's responding, and you want to look at it day to day. So basically what HRV-CV is it's looking at the variability that occurs from day to day in your HRV. So basically the variability of heart rate variability. And it looks at it across a 7-day rolling window. And what it's actually assessing here is the percentage difference that is occurring from day to day, the average percentage difference from day to day. And why that's so incredibly valuable is that we don't have really great firm parameters, but we're starting to identify parameters that are indicative of nervous system instability that happens across that 7-day window. And from that, we can then start to make decisions on, let's say from an exercise physiology perspective, we can start to make decisions on whether or not, like, hey, we need to dial up recovery, or more specifically, dial it down. Dial up performance through recovery, or dial down kind of the overall intensity and frequency or duration of exercise so that we can improve recovery. But also I'm starting to actually see this also in the mental performance side of things. And I would even say the stress resiliency side of things, because there are many individuals who I've been tracking kind of with this metric for a long period of time that haven't made substantial changes in their, let's say, exercise routine, but maybe they're going through periods of intense stress. Maybe there's financial difficulties, or maybe they're going through a divorce, or whatever it may be, and you start to see HRV-CV become significantly inflated. So a good general rule of thumb is that the less variable from day to day your HRV is, the better, indicative of more stability across time. The more variability, so if you have these big swings, for instance, let's say if your average daily baseline is 50 milliseconds, that's your RMSSD. And in one day, it goes up to 75 and then drops down to 25, and then goes back up to 60 and then back down to 20. That immense amount of variability is a signal. Now, again, when you have to dig deeper into that signal and understand context, it's a key here, but it's indicative of, oh goodness, we've got a lot of instability of the nervous system. It's not finding good baseline homeostasis. And so that can then drive decision making. So maybe during those periods of time, it's like hey, let's prioritize a little bit more of like self-care and recovery. maybe we need to add in, an additional biofeedback session a day. You've been doing one a day. Why don't we bookend our day with that? Or it's like, hey, why don't we also add in maybe a little bit of like meditation or mindfulness or some other strategy to help like better regulate that nervous system response? That's how I would use that from a decision-making perspective. But I think like what's really interesting to me in some of more the newer research is that we have the ability to use it less in like an exercise physiology context, and more we can use it in more of a clinical context or even like a coaching context for people who are trying to enhance things like mental performance or stress resiliency.
So even though you may be increasing stress resiliency, or as you say, mental performance, your HRV-CV should be maintained because you want to maintain stability.
Yeah, that's a good sign that the nervous system is maintaining, it's holding together. You want the nervous system to be less variable from day to day. Like you want it to adjust and to adapt. But sometimes what ends up happening is that when people are burning out their system, and I'm use that as much more of a global term, not a technical term, but if they're kind of lighting the candle at both ends, if you will, we'll start to see that the nervous system is just really unstable. And what can end up happening is some days you can have it to where it's like, man, nervous system's taking a hit here. Like we see a super suppressed HRV compared to your normal baseline. And then the next day, like we might see it skyrocket up almost as like a compensatory mechanism of the nervous system to say, we see some signs of instability. Boom, it skyrockets up and then drops back down to baseline the next day. So it's a bit of you have to use more of a nuanced decision-making process and understand the context here. But yeah, like if we see someone's baseline nervous system increasing like linearly, like HRV is increasing linearly, it might increase HRV-CV a little bit, but typically not a ton, because like we're not seeing like ginormous jumps from like 50 as your baseline to 75 to 100 to 120. That would be a very odd presentation where I would want to assess something more than just stress resiliency.
So this is sort of a variability of RMSSD across a 7-day window. So that it measures stability. How does that differ from, say, what RMSSD measures? I mean, we could just look at the average RMSSD over 7 days too. So what are they looking at differently?
Yeah, you could. I think it's a way of simplifying it, honestly. So like you could eyeball, let's see, even on a chart or a graph and say, oh yeah, like I can see that there's variance, or I can see there's stability. Or you can just take a singular metric, right? And you can say, all right, well, some of the early literature that we have right now says that when HRV-CV is 8% or lower, that's actually indicative of a good, strong, stable baseline. As it goes from about 9 to 15%, that's where it's like, caution, like, yellow flag is out, nothing to be like too alarmed of, but we should watch out. And then when it's over 15%, it's like, okay, this is highly variable. Like we do now understand that the nervous system is kind of showing some red flags. That's much easier to see if you just kind of look at it in those percentiles, as opposed to like if you're trying to, let's say someone's, HRV, typically their RMSSD is 50, and then the next day it's like 58, and the next day it's like 47, and the next day it's like 58. Like those differences, like eyeball wise, might actually look, oh yeah, they kind of look like they're holding close together. But then when you take the percent of it, now I can't run the percentage in my brain based off what I just said, it may actually be a lot more than what we even know. So it's more of just a way of simplifying things. It's kind of like, when we're looking at something like vagal tonality, right? It's like there are metrics that you can observe over time as a compilation that can help like show us what might be going on. Or you could use a singular metric like the natural log of high frequency power over time. And that's just an easier way to kind of like visualize it and be able to truly say that we see changes in vagal tone across 6 months of this person doing this training. I think that's kind of the same way with HRV-CV. It's an easy way to look at it.
That makes sense. And you're saying it's used more in exercise physiology than other areas of applied psychophysiology. Well, do you have any idea why that might be? Why it's not kind of spread into other areas?
I think the main reason is because of two researchers. One is Dr. Marco Altini, and the other is Dr. Andrew Flatt out of Georgia Southern University. Both of them are very much like exercise physiology focused, and so they've been doing studies and publishing studies on for years and years and years in the HRV space, kind of looking for like, well, what are these like really potent variables or metrics to assess. And the one that they kept coming back to was HRV-CV. So they focused then a lot of research on that metric itself for exercise physiology. And so I think like a bulk majority of what we know about HRV-CV as it relates to exercise physiology is because of those two researchers.
Okay. No, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Where you're at is where you publish, and that's who.
That's right.
That's right. About your stuff. Well, we'll see what we can do. Right. We'll see. Maybe we can get them to present to our folks like through the NRBS.
Oh, that'd be great. Yeah, they would be great.
Get them known more because it's a really interesting idea of looking at stability, and as you're saying, it just makes more sense, and it reflects, or I guess theoretically anyway, reflects the autonomic nervous system and kind of how it's doing across time.
That's right.
So you'd mentioned earlier wearables, which of course now is. We all have people coming in with their wearables and telling us what their Oura rings are saying and things like that. Yeah. How should we think about those data?
Man, I think this becomes so complicated, right? Because like every wearable does it differently. Right. The way they collect data, the way they're analyzing data. And then one thing that's really important for us that's maybe not as valuable to a lot of these wearable companies is that like a lot of the people in applied psychophysiology are very concerned with how data are artifacted and will spend a lot of their time cleaning data up. Whereas most of the filter passing that these data are going through in our wearables are not great. They're not like up to typically our standards. And so this makes it really complicated for us. The one thing I heard this one time, this might have been from actually Marco Altini, who I was just mentioning, who is an advisor for Oura, the sleep tracking ring, that he was saying it's like, they, depending on the wearable, sometimes you can say, hey, we don't have a high degree of confidence that the absolute values that we're producing are actually the absolute values, but we do the same thing consistently. Right. And so therefore from day to day, like even if it's not right, it's consistent. And there's part of me is kind of like, all right, I can kind of agree with that and see the use. But then another part of me is like, if you tell me that that your data is not super accurate, then I don't know if I can believe any of this stuff. Right. And so for me, it becomes quite a challenge. And here's what I would say is that like, no matter what wearable, like you probably need to, if anybody's working with people with wearables who like refuse to like give up their wearable data, there's like two different things that I tell them. Number one, like learn and understand like what their wearable is calculating and how they're calculating it. For instance, both Oura Ring and the Whoop Band, both of them collect nighttime RMSSD. Good. Like you look at the milliseconds value and those are both RMSSD values. However, Oura collects 5-minute epochs throughout the night for the entire night, and Whoop collects data only during certain sleep stages, which again, for many of the people listening to this, they're probably like, what? Like, where's the literature on why we should be collecting it only during certain sleep stages and then using that as the value? Doesn't really make any sense. Anyway, you wake up in the morning and let's say you have both a Whoop and an Oura Ring on. You're going to open up your app. Those are going to be two very different values. And you're going to be like, I am so confused. You said you collected the same thing. One says this value, the other says this. Who do I believe? And then you got, another guy over here who's wearing an Apple Watch. And his number comes up and he said, hey, my Oura Ring says 50 milliseconds. My Apple Watch says 100. What? Like we've got a 100% difference here. Well, Apple Watch is collecting SDNN, whereas the Oura Ring's collecting RMSSD. Apple Watch is also collecting data whenever it wants. Like it says, hey, got a signal, I'm going to try to collect it. As opposed to, again, Oura Ring says, okay, when I know you're asleep, every 5 minutes, I'm going to get these little epochs of data. And so it's just, you can't compare a wearable to a wearable. Certainly can't compare person to person. Like everything has to be kind of within its own context. So I say, okay, sure. If people want to use that as somewhat of a guide, they need to understand and you need to understand the limitations behind that. But And this is what I have every single one of my clients do. I don't care if you have a wearable or not. I have athletes who have 3 or 4 wearables that they wear every single night just because they love collecting data. I have everybody do a morning reading, a morning baseline reading. 2 to 5 minutes. Most are going to sit with a Polar H10 on, or they're going to use like some other type of really good high fidelity PPG. Of course, like the company that I have, Ohm. We sample at 1,000 hertz, so it's a really high fidelity PPG. You could use something like that. I like the morning reading because you control the context. You can make it consistent every single time, same day, same place, same situation. You control that. And then also what's really interesting about taking morning readings is that, of course, you can get really good still readings when you're asleep. But what you don't introduce is the psychological variables. So when you wake up in the morning and you sit there to do your reading, not only are we measuring the physiological recovery of your autonomic nervous system that sleep should have had on it. So you're waking up, you're fresh. Like you should be in like the most primed nervous system state possible because you just got done with, doing sleep, which is intended to repair the nervous system. But also you start to layer in the psychological components. Well, your brain's thinking, oh, look what I've got going today. Oh, I've got that board meeting today, or I've got that game tonight. And that gets introduced and kind of filtered into the data. I just find it to be a much more robust way of tracking baseline HRV than I do wearables. So I take wearable data with a huge grain of salt, and then I have everybody do a morning baseline reading.
And that makes a lot of sense. I think it's good advice to do that in the morning, regardless again of the device you're using. Although better is better. But I'm going to use that to segue to the Ohm device. So Ohm did not go in that direction. They're just not a wearable. And I'm not sure it's its own category. I think. Disclosure. I saw the Ohm demonstrated at the AAPB conference, and man, I ordered one right away. I think it looks like a really great idea.
Thank you.
Could you describe it and also tell us a little bit about the design philosophy behind it?
Yeah. So, and I appreciate that. The one thing that we really wanted to do with Ohm, and this kind of set out with, just from the very start, is that we saw all of the value that HRV biofeedback has in helping to enhance our livelihood. Like we truly believe that at its core. There's so much research that to be based on that, but also for me clinically, like I've seen it, now for 20 years of doing it. The one thing though that kept being a barrier was the phone and a wearable. And in one sense, it sounds like, oh, okay, like, put on a wearable, like, an armband or a wristband or a Polar H10, open up your app and just do it each day. And I think that, like, in theory, that's a pretty easy task. But in reality, there's actually more friction to that than one might believe. Well, where's my Polar H10? I can't find it. Did I leave it in my office? I don't know where it's at. Well, I'll get it later and do it. Well, later never happens, or later passes by and you're like the next day, oh yeah, I forgot to do my reading or my biofeedback. So that's a complication. Then you just have like all of the complication of like tech, right? It's like, oh, I got to get this thing connected to my phone. Is it connecting right? Is it collecting? I don't know. There's another friction point. And then kind of the last friction point is that people really enjoy HRV biofeedback initially because there's a lot of novelty to it and there's fun data, but then also it can get kind of old, like sitting there and just watching a flower like open and close and open and close. And also you're sitting there on your phone and got a text message or got an email. It looks kind of urgent. Let me click on it. And now I'm not doing biofeedback anymore. And so what we came out, the reason we designed Ohm the way we did is because we wanted it to have more of like a human-like experience and then just reduce every barrier that we could think of that people could leverage as a bit of an excuse to not do the practice. And so what Ohm is a lamp. It is a biometric lamp. So it looks kind of like almost like a cylinder, almost like an egg. Unfortunately, I don't have mine with me because I had to pack it up because I'm going on a trip tomorrow. But it's basically just a lamp. And on top of the lamp, and it's one piece of beautiful hand-blown molded glass. And on top is a stone. It is a sensor. Actually, I do have the sensor right here because I was testing on it. It's right here. So this is a stone that sits on top. Doesn't say J on it. This was sent to me by one of my engineers. But the stone lives on top. You take the stone off, and as soon as you take it, and we have our PPG sensor here, instead of putting it on your wrist or like on your arm, you actually just hold it in your palm. And what we found out is that we can get really great signal off of PPG from the palm in a very interesting place. Actually, one that out of all my years, I'm not sure if I've actually seen another product that does it from the palm. Almost everybody is doing it from, a place on the arm, or there's forearm, bicep, or finger, or somewhere, like that. Not the palm. And the reason we chose palm is because we wanted this stone to be something that was just comfortable to hold, that you could rest in your lap. And it could just be that, hey, for 20 minutes, 15, 20 minutes, I'm just going to sit here with it. It's very heavy. It's also very warm. And we created it to be warm with intention to warm the hands and the palm. And also the stone has haptics in it, so it will vibrate. And what happens is once you take the stone off, we start to kind of measure your nervous system response. We're looking at HRV, a compilation of different HRV metrics. We're looking at, of course, heart rate. And then we're taking the lamp, we'll start to oscillate up and down. So that light will move up. That's an inhalation, and it will move down, and that's an exhalation. And for about the first 30 seconds or so to around a minute, we're watching how your nervous system responds to a very standard breathing pattern. We're fluctuating it just a little bit in different ways. And kind of like I mentioned in the webinar, I can't say too much exactly about the algorithm, but I'll give you as much as I can. But basically, we're watching, and when I say we, our algorithm is watching how does your nervous system respond just to kind of this standard breathing pace. Where are things becoming amplified? Where are things a little bit more suppressed? And then we're starting to make fine-tune adjustments to the pacer, the inhalation and exhalation, to maximize kind of all of these outputs that we want in terms of low frequency power and amplitude of your heart rate oscillations, the smoothness of that sinusoidal wave, and we're dialing that in over a period of time. And so what we're trying to do is more info that you feed us, the more we're learning about your nervous system's response, and we're tuning it and tuning it and tuning it. And then in the meantime, what's also happening is that as you start to create those beautiful sinusoidal wave patterns in your heart, something very much consistent with a state of physiological resonance, the lamp itself will give you the biofeedback, which is through color change, through sound change, and also through haptic change. So as you get into more of a deeper relaxation state, you'll start to see the lamp go for this white color to a more deeper orange. And then when you start to create those beautiful maximized sinusoidal waves, that state of resonance, the whole lamp will glow blue. And that's actually indicative that you're in that state. So now hold it there. And if you find yourself falling out of it, no problem. Become mindful of it, come back to the breathing, and just work on getting yourself there as quickly or as efficiently as possible. And then whenever you're done, instead of, disconnecting from your phone or taking a wearable off, you just take the stone and you dock it back on top, which is an induction charger for the battery in the stone, and you go about your day. And then for people like, you and me, Saul, and all the others that are listening to this, if you are a data nerd, we do have a phone-based app. So you can go on your app, and you can look at all the heart rate, all the time domain indices, frequency domain indices. You can look at things like behavioral tracking over time. So we give you that. We just don't make it the star of the show. Like for us, we find that most individuals in this space, they have no idea what HRV is. They have no idea what these metrics are. And so for them, they're less concerned with hey, I need data right in my face. I can do that post hoc. I can just look at stuff if I want to. But really kind of the practice or the power lies in the ability just to practice really quickly and have something that people want to come back to over and over again, instead of having some friction points that lend itself to hey, I'm going to shelve this biofeedback thing because I got to put on a chest strap or I got to put on a armband. So sorry, I know that was a lot, but I wanted to kind of give the whole tour of the experience.
Oh, no, it's okay. And it seems like it's focused more on the intervention side of HRV rather than the measurement side of HRV. But who is the device for?
This is a really good question. And I would say, honestly, we as a team at Ohm are still trying to fully figure that out. Mm-hmm. And I say that not because we're who would use this? We don't know. We actually think that there's value in everybody using this, but we also don't want to go out with a target market of everybody, right? We want to make sure that this is built for, for at least a specific or a couple of specific populations. Here's kind of what we're finding. And we've done a lot of user testing, a lot of interviews. We brought this out to a lot of people. And what we're finding is, at least initially with kind of our launch, we've attracted a few kind of I guess you could call them archetypes of people. One is kind of the people that I work with, which are I am a biohacking, like I like data quantitative person who wants like all that stuff. I like the latest and greatest technology. I, have tried something like, I've tried heart math before. I've tried, optimal HRV, elite HRV. Like I've tried those before, and like I want something new just to see if I like it better. But it's more from like a optimization standpoint. Like what can I do to enhance my sense of health and longevity? So maybe less of like hey, I'm really stressed, or I've got a clinical disorder, PTSD, anxiety, depression. More of just like I want to just like optimize, enhance by 1%. There's that. Then we have the individuals who are like, no, I'm really freaking stressed, and at work I don't know what to do. At home I don't know what to do. I can't sleep well. I'm battling with insomnia, and I just need some tool that can help ground me. And there's kind of like that person that I think that could really benefit from this. And then this last category is kind of in that same one, but actually I would say that I won't say I'm the most proud of this one, but I would say that this is the one that I have probably the biggest heart for right now, which is we are finding that there are a lot of parents who want this, being a parent, but also for their kids. And I think that if you think about the space right now, or the current culture in terms of mental health and wellness, probably one of the most underserved populations as it relates to who technology is built for are kids. There's a lot of technologies that are built for kids in terms of like, let's say, meditation apps. But again, like not many parents want to put their kid in front of an iPad or meditation app or meditation game and have that kind of be what they need. So I think that being able to pick up a stone, like anybody could pick up a stone and know, okay, and by anybody, I mean, typically we're going to be about 5 years and older. Breathe when this goes up, breathe in. When this goes down, breathe out, and just hold the stone in your hand. And when that glows blue, that's where we want to be. That's great. And if it falls out of blue, that's okay. Just keep breathing with it. Like most people can follow that. And it ranges like from small kids all the way even to geriatric populations who are also immensely underserved in this space. And they can't sit there with a phone and watch all this data fly across the screen. It's too unnerving for a lot of these people. And especially for kids, they are, of course, are not going to have any clue what they're seeing. So for us, like we're just trying to simplify every bit of biofeedback, but also stay very deeply rooted in the science. We don't want to negate the science. We just want the science to be kind of in the background running in all the algorithms, as opposed to like in your face.
Well, as we sort of wrap up, is there anything or any one piece of advice or something you think we as clinicians should know when we're working with this population?
The one thing that I would think is an interesting takeaway. I've heard so many clinicians who become very frustrated with like I give them something to do. Initially, they really buy into it and like it, but then after like a week, 2 weeks, like they like disregard it, or they'll forget where they put their sensor or whatever it may be. And what I would say about that is that like I felt the same way. It's again, like a behavior is only as good as what if you're actually doing it. And so if there are barriers in the way, then I would say reduce that friction as much as humanly possible. Like I think that that's a big helpful piece, whether that's through OM or if there are other technologies that can help with that. I mean, OM it's one type of technology. It's kind of in its like own category, but there are other ways to like help reduce friction. I think a lot of times like we as clinicians want to give like the best protocol that we can based in like science. And there's nothing wrong with that. But it's like, kind of back in the day, I remember when I first learned this, like the clinical protocol was 25 minutes twice a day. Mm-hmm. And I never had anybody who was ever doing that. Like I would rarely have people who could do once 25 minutes a day. And I was always so discouraged because I'm like, well, if you want this to work, like we got to put in 25 minutes twice a day. And then as more research came out, we found, okay, actually, like we can lower the bar in terms of time and duration a little bit. Like this is like, we don't have to be as rigid with this 50 minutes a day being kind of the sweet spot. Now, is there benefit to 50 minutes? Of course there's benefit for 50 minutes a day. But the true reality of it is that like less than 1% of people are actually going to do this for that long. So I would say give people things that are realistic. This goes back to like easy, like clinical SMART goals, right? Like make it very specific and reasonable, obtainable. I think that's my big thing for people. Don't try to boil the ocean by giving people like intensive protocols. Reduce the friction, make it simple.
Good advice. Make it simple.
Yeah.
So Jay, if people wanted to find out more about you or about the Ohm device, where would they go?
Sure. Yeah. Check out Ohm. And we're still in pre-market phase. We'll be shipping out here in about maybe a month or so. Like we're right there at the finish line. But the website is ohm.health. Check us out there. I would love to get feedback as well. I mean, the thing that I love about this audience I'm speaking to right now, of course, for your groups all, is that this is a very curated audience for what we've built. So we are always open to feedback and, hey, have you thought about it from this angle? Or, like I want to try it and kind of give you feedback. Like I love that stuff. We've already gotten so much. I mean, I spent so much time at AAPB just talking with clinicians who like were already bringing out some really interesting nuances to the product and the experience. And I'm like, this is fantastic, like brilliant idea. And we've already built some of that stuff into the product itself. So feedback is great. So ohm.health. And then also like my website, if you're ever interested in kind of the work that I do with high performers. So my consulting arm of my business is called Thrive Wellness and Performance. Thrive Wellness and Performance. So if you go to thrive-wellness.com, you can learn a little bit about kind of how I do work there. And I know that here recently, probably in the last 5 years or so, you start to see a lot of athletes and high performers who are looking for this type of work. And so I would say too, like if this is of an interest area of yours, anybody listening to this, like strike now while the iron is hot, because these individuals are looking for immensely competent people. And I would say that there's actually more people looking for this type of work nowadays than there are clinicians. So I actually think this is a really great opportunity for people to get into this space because there's a fair amount of abundance of work, which is really good. And this is, again, not to like step on any other types of specialties, but if you think about kind of the world of like therapy and like even clinical psychology, which of course is the space that I'm trained in, it's becoming actually fairly saturated right now. And so if you can differentiate yourself with like this skill, which everybody listening to this is, in the performance space, there's a lot of room there. And I think that's a great thing. I don't know how long it'll last, but get in while you can.
Exactly, absolutely. And we'll put links to both organizations in the notes and as well as a link to the webinar that you did. So Dr. Jay Wiles is the Chief Health and Performance Officer at Ohm Health, and he is a performance psychologist himself. Thank you so much for joining us on Healthy Brain, Happy Body.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. It was a pleasure.
Thanks for joining us on Healthy Brain, Happy Body. Subscribe to this podcast by clicking the subscribe here link in the show notes or wherever you get your podcasts. If you enjoy Healthy Brain, Happy Body, please rate us and leave reviews at Apple Podcast, YouTube, or wherever you get the podcast. Reviews help us reach more listeners, and that's more people who can learn about and benefit from biofeedback, neurofeedback, and other mind-body approaches to health. Also, let us know what you think by sending us email. Our address is healthybrain@nrbs.org. Healthy Brain, Happy Body is produced and edited by me. The theme music is Catch It by Coma Media. It is a production of the Northeast Region Biofeedback Society. Go to nrbs.org to find out more about the organization, including our trainings, monthly webinars, and yearly conference. All opinions expressed are those of our guests and not the NRBS. This podcast is not meant to replace advice from qualified healthcare providers. Healthy Brain, Happy Body is supported by the sponsors of NRBS. Be sure to join us on our next episode as we continue to explore the keys to our well-being on Healthy Brain, Happy Body.